In June of 2003, we celebrated a Faith Festival Day in Bardstown, and during that time, I was asked to give a speech. And as a historian, you look back to get the basis for your speech when you want to talk about what was going on in Nelson County, particularly in the fact that the early settlers were coming out here and planting the seeds of faith in Nelson County. Now what I'm going to do is actually read you the speech, because I read it at that day and I had forgotten it for many years until I found it on the computer, and I said, I need to get this out and look it over again. And so today I'm going to literally tell you exactly what I told the group in 2003. It's fit and proper to look back more than 200 years to the beginning of faith in our community. Look back to the time when ministers rode horseback and to cabins and wooded bowers to preach and pray, to baptize and marry, to preach and bury. Their congregations were spread out sometimes more than an hour's ride by the worshipers by horse or wagon. Their services were held when the weather allowed. Picture the faithful walking or riding down the dusty roads, dressed in their best, carrying a basket, food, sunbonnets on the ladies, leather or felt hats on the men. The children were barefoot but clean and neat. As they come together, they greet friends they have not seen since the last time that a service was held. Weather and the availability of the minister determine the schedule of services, not the desire of the congregation. More services in the good weather, less in the bad. If they were so fortunate as to have built a sturdy church, it provided the shelter. Sometimes the largest house in the neighborhood was used. In the early years, the shelter could have been an elm tree. I don't know if you've ever seen an elm tree, but it's an umbrella type tree. All of the branches are long and flexible, and they come down over you like an umbrella. And the early congregations would meet under the elm, and as their minister spoke, his voice would go up but wouldn't go outside the tree, because that umbrella tree kept the voice inside as well as the singing. And it also was shady in the hot weather. Sometimes just a shady site near a spring was all they could call their chapel or meeting house. As the countryside flourished, these pioneers would build their own homes and plantations. They took time to organize and erect their churches. In the town of Bardstown in 1804, an itinerant peddler, Samuel P. Jones, willed all his property to be sold and the proceeds to go to build a church that all those who believed in Jesus Christ crucified could worship there. His executors took his property, sold it, contracted with a builder, and in 1812, the church known as the Union Church was constructed on North 2nd Street and was used by several of the Protestant congregations until they were able to construct their own church. The Presbyterians, the Methodists, and then the Baptists would all use the Union Church. And as they raised funds and started to build their own churches, then they moved out into those, and someone else stepped up to use the building. An advertisement in the local paper in 1816 noted a meeting was to be held there to form a Bible society. It noted, quote, "All Christians need to regard. No party feelings can have place." And what that meant, we weren't going to argue each version of their Christian denomination. Everyone should come together and study the Bible as they together. This church was used even before the Civil War by the African Americans in the community, and today it continues in their possession as the First Baptist Church. Out in the countryside, church groups were organized from the early settlement years. The first two Baptist churches in Kentucky were organized in 1781 in Nelson County: Severance Valley, which is now in Hardin County, and Cedar Creek, west of Bardstown. Their pastors were local landowners who also served as ministers. Cox's Creek Baptist Church soon followed Mill Creek Baptist near Botland. It was a frame church built in 1793. The Baptists in town met at the Union Church until 1829, when they erected their own church 2 blocks north of the courthouse. After fire destroyed this building, a larger church was erected 1 block further north. It's still being used by the Bardstown Baptist. In the 1830s, a minister of the Baptist Church, Samuel Carpenter, began preaching the sentiments or preachings of Barton Stone and Alexander Campbell. This divided the church, and followers of Campbell's teachings left the church and organized the Disciples of Christ. The Christian church movement met in homes and halls until 1890s, when they built the church now occupied by the Episcopal Church of the Ascension, the second block of North 3rd. Though there were Methodist settlers in the county as early as 1785, it would be 1791 when Reverend Joseph Ferguson erected Ferguson's Chapel Methodist Church, 6 miles east of town. This is the town Methodist used the Union Church. On one of his travels in 1814, Bishop Francis Osbury visited this church to speak. The Methodists erected a house of worship on East Flagey in 1836. When this was struck by lightning and burned, they erected another on their present site. And the building on their present site was burned in the fire of 1856. The present building was erected after that fire. I'm afraid the Methodists have a hard time with fire. They have been burned 3 times in our history. 3 blocks away, St. John's AME Zion Church was built in 1891 and welcomed native Bishop Alexander Walters back to speak in 1905. The Methodist church at Woodlawn was the outgrowth of Ferguson's Chapel. In the early years, everyone identified the Woodlawn Church as Ferguson's Chapel, and later they would call it Poplar Flat Methodist Church. The Presbyterian circuit rider, Terra Templin, was a familiar name in the young town of Bardstown. In 1785, he received a license to perform marriages in Nelson County. The first church was a log structure in the Presbyterian Cemetery on North 5th Street. On a visit to Bardstown in 1818, Templin died and was buried in the cemetery. The Presbyterians worshipped at the Union Church till 1827, when they erected their present church. A Lutheran church was built by landowners in the Germantown area out the Shepherdsville Road. The blown down in the 1942 tornado, it is still remembered by the road that was named for it, the Lutheran Church Road. The first Catholic settlers in Kentucky, the William Coombs and George Hart families, moved to Bardstown in the early 1780s. But it would be later in the 1790s before a priest was assigned to serve the few members of the congregation here. St. Joseph's congregation met in a rustic cabin built in the present Catholic cemetery and later met in the home of Anthony Sanders. In 1806, Father Stephen Theodore Baden recommended to Bishop Carroll in Baltimore that Bardstown to be chosen for the seat of a new diocese. 2 years later, the Diocese of Bardstown was created. The Reverend Benedict Joseph Flagey was chosen as the first bishop, and he arrived here in 1811 to begin a 40-year career in building churches and schools. St. Thomas was the first church built by Flagey, and soon afterward he started St. Joseph Cathedral in Bardstown. He had solicited promises in money, goods, or labor to build this structure. More than $10,000 of the approximate $25,000 it cost to complete this structure was given by the Protestants of the community. There were 5 overseers of the work, one of which is, during the construction he wrote in a letter, there are 5 overseers of the work, one of which is an atheist but a good worker nonetheless. Flagey worked well with all. Soon after the arrival of Flagey, the Sisters of Charity of Nazareth was formed in 1812 to teach and to nurse. It's the second oldest order of Catholic nuns in Kentucky. The Sisters of Loretta are the oldest by 5 months. In early Nelson County, there were some members of the Episcopal faith, but the congregation of the Episcopal Church of the Ascension began in the 1970s. Today they worship at the church built by the Disciples of Christ on North 3rd. We also have to recognize that religion played a very important part in early education. The earliest private schools were supported by the Presbyterians, the Baptists, the Methodists, and the Catholics. This church commitment to education continued throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. Well, why are we looking back? Shouldn't we be looking forward? To get a plan on what you're going to do to prepare for the future, you have to look back and see what's happened before. I always look back to review the efforts of those who laid the foundation for our community, the community we enjoy today. Their tradition of Christian work and worship is still in evidence. Their labors, sacrifices, and gifts in honor of the Almighty, the churches, the schools, are on exhibit every day, all around us for our appreciation and use. Don't take it for granted. Accept it as a trust passed on in faith that each succeeding generation will use and care for it. Use it in preparing and living a life of faith and preserve it for our future generations. We don't have to ride a horse for an hour to worship today in Nelson County, but the need and the desire for the gathering of the faithful is still here. Let us thank our forefathers who sowed the seeds and built the houses of worship by helping all those in need of human contact and faith. Let us realize that what we do today can and will be appreciated in the future.